Hello and welcome to the flagship episode of our podcast, Wishbonafide, the podcast where we watch the seminal 90s PBS classic Wishbone and read the work of literature to which each episode refers, and then compare. Let's introduce ourselves as hosts first. My name is Claire McCrae. I'm a TV professional and fan of all media types, not the least of which is books. I'll be a regular co-host and editor for this little shindig here we got going.
I'm Erin Venable, your other co-host. I was an English major in college, so I have a particular interest in the literature the Wishbone covers, and I watched the show frequently as a child, so of course I was happy to talk about it more. And I am really excited to write and talk in this podcast.
I think we make a good team, and we were both fans of the show, and I think you have the book side and I have the TV side covered, so together we're a pretty swell pair. We're going to have a guest each week who is one of our illustrious and intelligent friends, and this week we thought it would be very appropriate to have Rory Nachbar.
Hi.
We were once upon a time college roommates and now co-host and produce this show. She is here with us today and is our first guest on Wishbonafide.
Hey guys, it's really cool to be here.
Tell us about yourself.
All right. Well, I am a social media specialist, so my role in this podcast is getting to do all the fun behind the scenes, marketing.
We're happy to have you.
I'm happy to be here.
I just am excited. That's what I'm mostly bringing to this. Just unadulterated enthusiasm along with your ability to make people find out that we exist, Rory, and Erin's actual intelligence. Better at books than either of us.
Yes.
It's my specialty.
And so we have commenced with this adventure, and we're happy to have you along, Rory, for this nostalgia trip. Let's talk about how our show will work. There's 3 main segments, the first and most important of which is the terrier in the room, a breakdown of the faithfulness and changes the episode made to the primary source material, and why we suspect the changes were made, if they mattered, if they helped or hurt, if it really just stayed true to the essence of the book, as much as it could within half of a 27-minute children's television program. Just really how it holds up against its source material. The second segment is Scrunch Time, where we put on our thinking scrunchies and reflect on the 90s tween frame story in relation to the primary story, as well as to the present. If the lesson to be learned in this episode is good or not, or existent, you could say. And of course, all of the wonderful nostalgic 90s things that will come up as we watch it. And last but not least, to tie it all off, the dog factor, which will be a short segment to comment on the dog actor's abilities in certain categories such as stunts, emoting, tricks, patience, adorability, method acting, overall costuming expertise, and so on. Erin, Rory, do you have any wishes for our listeners, what you want them to get out of this show?
When I'm doing this podcast, I want to revisit the literature or visit for the first time some of the literature to experience that, and then watch Wishbone again and revisit my childhood, but also see how this adaptation worked and enjoy it. And I'd like listeners to have that experience too. Go back to the literature if you want. Go back to the episodes if you want. If not, just come along with us and hear what we think about all of it.
That was so cute. Very well said.
I like it. I think it would be really fun if people read and watched along with us and remembered what a cute show this was from their childhood or maybe when their kids watched it. I just think that it's a really great show. Maybe you've never even seen it before and you're watching it now and seeing what a little gem you missed. But I think what I really like most is I am a sucker for any sort of culture that combines high-class sort of intellectual, intense sort of culture with silliness and fun and shenanigans that don't require as much in-depth analysis and combining the two, because that's really the best of both worlds for me. It's fun, it's lighthearted, but it really has a wealth of material to cover and to think about and discuss, and I think that combining those two is a fabulous idea, so props to the creators of Wishbone the show, and I think it'll be fun breaking some of that down with you guys, and with any future guests we have.
Yep.
Is that all you have to contribute?
No. I definitely agree with what Aaron and Claire said. Personally, what I enjoy of this podcast the most is getting to work on this project on the behind the scenes kind of aspect and getting to see all the guests come through who get really excited about watching the show again or reading the books again or actually just having a discussion about the literature. And that's not something that everyone gets to do either in class or just in general. And it's a nice kind of experience to have in a very unique setting.
Especially if you're not in class, which
yeah.
none of us are anymore.
No, but I mean, when they've read the books, they've frequently read them in high school or college. Mm-hmm. So this is a different kind of experience discussing it in, I don't want to say an adult world, but an out of the classroom situation.
And I don't know that some of our analysis will be quite so academic.
Yeah. Which is why I think it's fun. Mm-hmm. And as you said, like it's blending, academic and, higher end things with goofiness. And I definitely think that's in our podcast. I just like doing the podcast with you guys. That's what I enjoy getting out of it.
Lovely. Now, there are about 50 episodes of Wishbone, the show, 48-ish stories in all. So there's going to be about 50 episodes of Wishbonafide. There are two-parter episodes in Wishbone, one for Tom Sawyer, which we will be discussing today, and one for Sleepy Hollow in the distant future. So don't hold your breath too long. There is also a movie, so if we can find that, we shall make a special for that, and it will be a truly special occasion indeed, because I have looked in many places and cannot get my hands on this footage, so fingers crossed that we get there. But if not, we have the whole original series, and maybe by the time we get to 50, there will be the Netflix reboot of Wishbone, so we have all kinds of new episodes to work on, and we can keep going. That's enough chit-chat for now. I think let's get to the meat of it. Aaron, tell us about the book we're talking about today, which is The Adventures of Tom Sawyer by Mark Twain.
This book follows the exploits and escapades of Tom Sawyer, a boy in Missouri in the mid-19th century who lives in a very rural area where you'd think that not much would happen, but somehow Tom manages to find lots of different things to get himself into, such as pretending to play pirates, being presumed drowned, showing...
Those are two so similar things. Playing pirates like normal children, faking your own death like normal children, painting a fence like normal child,
getting other people to paint the fence for you,
stopping murderers. Your average day.
Finding buried treasure, getting lost in caverns for days on ends and almost starving to death.
Not so casual racism.
Not at all casual racism against multiple races.
It's a lovely book for children everywhere.
And romance.
How romance. Old are they? I don't know. They're like 11 or something? I think they're 11, and it's weirder when one is a dog, if I have to really put that out there. It gets way more concerning when that's true.
Let's just forget the romance.
We'll move on. Rory, you want to tell us about what happens in the 90s part of the story? If you can get any words out.
I hope so. Wishbone introduces us to his family, Ellen, the mom, Joe, her son, and we also meet his friends. There is Sam, the tomboy, and David, the tech wizard. There's also Wanda, the crazy neighbor. Wanda alert!
Wanda alert! She's the weirdest. Continue.
And on this particular story, we find out that Joe is at the end of the summer, and he kind of wants to go on an adventure. So he and his friends meet up, and they go to a creepy old gravesite, and they stumble across a sketchy man who's digging some stuff up.
What is he doing?
It's so sketchy.
It's so sketchy.
So they run away out of the woods.
Cross the bridge to Terabithia rope swing?
Yes. And they tell Ellen about it, and Wanda, and Ellen and Wanda decide to go on a little adventure with them, and they come across the sketchy man again. He explains, after they have all startled each other, he explains that he is digging up his ancestors' buried treasure of violins and documents and memorabilia, that they saved, and it's part of his family heritage. Ellen and Wanda and the children are no longer as creeped out, which is nice. And
I was.
Yeah.
And Wanda invites him to a picnic for the neighborhood, and they talk about history and families and stories.
Yes. Because what was in that grave box is part of the town history and part of his family history. And because stories and history is kind of the gist of this whole show and of our series as well.
Yep.
So I thought that was fitting. If really hammered right on the
That
head.
first episode.
Super intensely.
Not at all high-handed.
No. There's one part that Ellen gives a good speech because she's chosen as the speech giver at this picnic. Because that's the thing that happens at all picnics, I'm pretty sure. Ellen's speech, and this is a direct quote, goes along the lines of, "Different stories brought us to the same place. That's what stories do. They bring us to the same place. And this neighborhood, well, it's our place. It's the home of our stories." It's so redundant. I guess it's a children's show, but...
It sounds like a monologue a child would give in an audition. Stories. Different stories. Our place.
My stories, your stories, our
place.
stories.
Yes.
Places for stories. They're story places. This is our story place. And while we're in our story place, let's go straight for the terrier in the room, in which we talk about the efficiency with which this episode told the story of Tom Sawyer and his friends.
The first thing that I found very interesting when watching their adaptation was Injun Joe became Crazy Joe.
Crazy Joe's coming back to town. Did I break you?
Okay, we're doing a podcast.
Crazy Joe. I'm certainly a stickler for book adaptations for movies and things like that. I'm one of those people who's like, well, it was like this in the book, and I think it really lost something. I'm that obnoxious person. So in this, I did not mind that they changed Injun Joe to Crazy Joe. I gotta tell you, I think that was for the best, both for children's television and for an escape from generations of racism. I did not mind at all.
I feel like they also did that for the romance with Becky Thatcher. They cut that out a lot, which again, I have no issue with, because in the book, when I read that as a preteen, I was very uncomfortable and I did not enjoy it.
It's concerning, and again, more concerning with the dog protagonist. So they relegated Becky to the sidelines a great deal, and I think anyone who's read Tom Sawyer will be just fine with that.
I think they did a good job changing the order of Tom Sawyer as well to make it make more sense. They had them pretending to be pirates go straight into the funeral scene and had the plot with Injun Joe as a separate arc. And I actually thought that that worked well for children. Having multiple stories going on at one time when there's also another story happening is extra complicated. Tom Sawyer as a novel is somewhat complicated. So I thought they did a nice job breaking it down more simply like that.
Mm-hmm. I think the way that they switched the pirate scene and the graveyard scene around the funeral was really quite intelligent because it also built up the gravity of each situation from play fun to serious things to even more intense and dangerous adventures involving someone being killed right in front of Huck Finn and Tom Sawyer, which they show. It's not like bloody or gory or anything. It's still for kids, but I was impressed that they valued their audience in not pretending that things that were bad that could happen at this time didn't exist. Okay with removing racial slurs, but they did stay true to what the story was trying to say in all of these smaller adventures. It is notable, though, I think, to say that as far as Crazy Joe goes, even though they did some stabby-stabby on screen, Crazy Joe's death happens off screen, and they don't even really describe how, as it happens in the book, he's locked in the caverns of the caves and starves to death really horribly. And in this version, they just sort of, in an exposition, going, and Crazy Joe's dead. That's the end of that.
I think they didn't give you that sense of peril in the caves with Tom and Becky. They were lost, but it was very brief. In the book, it dragged on, their candles all slowly burnt out. They were both crawling around in the dark. Tom comes face to face with Injun Joe. It's scary. They both separate. They aren't sure if they're going to make it out, and Tom eventually is brave enough to crawl around and find an exit to the caverns, while Injun Joe starves and dies there. And that ending, it's sort of the climax, is lost in the episode. It's very brief. He and Becky are sitting in a cave for a little bit, and then they escape and everything's fine.
Yeah, I feel like you definitely miss out on some of the character development and the in-depth, especially of Tom, that Mark Twain writes regarding his manipulation. and his relationships with other people in the town. Like, you completely miss the iconic fence scene, which I guess they allude to when he jumps over it. But you do miss, his shenanigans and the fact that he's a leader of the boys. And yes, we do like that they dropped the Becky Thatcher romance, but that leadership within the boys is meant to impress her. And while in some cases it's really great that they cut some of these things that we're talking about, I feel like you miss an essential part of his characterization in others.
I didn't actually have that much of a problem with that. I really think they did a good job of conveying the mischievousness of the character through Wishbone's antics and banter and so on and so forth with Huck Finn, even if they didn't have a lot of the band
scenes.
of boys or the scenes in which he had people doing things through him through his cunning. I think that for me, they took a lot of the darkness in a more metaphorical sense than Aaron was referring to out of the storyline, like we said, with a lot of the deaths and with Huck Finn's home life with his father, who's an abusive alcoholic, and they removed a lot of that to just keep it to the merry band of two that we did get, and I was pretty okay with that.
I did think you also lost the sense of normalcy that Mark Twain built into the world. There are a lot more normal boyhood antics included in the book, such as the fence scene, or they prank a teacher at one point, and that's hilarious and adorable. And there's a lot of normal things that happen between these huge, life-changing adventures. And they cut that, which I understand, but you do lose that. I think Mark Twain was trying to capture in the South that slowness and the normalcy of life then, and how things were calmer, even though there were big dramatic things happening as well. So I think that as an adaptation, they gave you a lot of the big points. They shortened it into ways that made more sense and were easier to understand. But of course, when you do that, you lose some of the setting and some of the character development and things like that.
Cut for time, man, cut for time. Though I will say, I would rather have them cut a lot of those everyday boyhood moments than the treasure scene or something like that. I think with the minimum time they have, they only had like 11 minutes max per episode, like 8 in one of them, to do these Tom Sawyer bits and segments that I don't think it would have made sense to have included some of the stuff that they left out, because I would have been a little bit more miffed if they had. I think that the 3 instances they chose aren't as entirely representative of the whole of the book, as you said, but I think they do the best possible job making someone perhaps interested to go and read it themselves, which is kind of the point of Wishbone as a show in general.
I did really enjoy this adaptation. I really enjoyed how in the details they worked hard to stick to what the book had said. When Crazy Joe's hiding out in that haunted town, he's wearing, again, racism in the book, he's wearing the outfit of a Mexican or some, I don't even remember how they reference it, but something offensive. And they kept to that as his disguise in the show, even though they didn't really need to. But I thought that it was nice that they worked in these small ways to still give you the book.
The beauty was in the details for a lot of it. Like, the funeral scene was really period, and it had a lot of lovely costumes, and it was just sort of a gleeful part of the story, both from the low to the high of them strolling on into their own funeral. I think they did a great job of isolating moments that were lovely, if not the whole of the arc. But that's hard because Tom Sawyer isn't one complete arc. It's not a beginning and a middle and an end so much. So I think they did the best possible job, and I enjoyed it.
I also really liked that they kept the ending. They could have ended it with the boys getting the treasure and being accepted into the town and finding normalcy and going back to what normal boys or good boys should do, and instead you get Huck Finn back in his barrel and Tom chasing after him in his barrel, and they're talking about being robbers and their next adventure. And I thought that was great that they kept that, and you got that sense like you do in the book, rather than some more happy ending.
Yeah, like, it wasn't sort of like, Mrs. Douglas adopts me, and now I'm going to be happy forever with a stable home life. They were still up to no good, like boys their age were. All right, now that we're in agreement, we can move on to the arguably more silly and fun things. Ladies, put on your thinking scrunchies because it is time for Scrunch Time, the segment in which we talk about our favorite 90s moments, the parallels between the two stories within the episode that were told, and whether or not we think they did a good job teaching a lesson. I really have no idea what the moral is supposed to be. I think it might be something along the lines of stories are important to tell and preserve. Maybe. Ellen's speech about stories and places and stories and story places. I think that's what drove that home for me, but otherwise, I'm a little bit foggy.
Claire, I think you're onto something with Ellen always referring back to stories and that being a rather redundant theme. But I think if you really want to put it into a modern perspective, think about immigrants and, the discussion of immigrants today and for the past, 50, 100 years or so, and how it's important to some people, many people, in fact, that we remember our heritage, that we remember where we came from, especially in America, and honor that to some degree, whether that means that you build a better future for your children or you keep up traditions from your ancestors or what have you. I think in this way, Wishbone, it could be a way to view this episode. And maybe as an adult, it's a way to view that episode, maybe not for children.
Yeah, in a simpler way for children, it could just be the importance of community and of family itself and your heritage. I think that's a lovely lesson. I'm not sure exactly what it has to do particularly with Tom Sawyer. I think the only parallel there is like they found treasure, that man had treasure.
Yes.
And that's a little weak, but I do like each individual story told, even though I don't feel that they connect in a very meaningful or lesson-giving way.
I thought that maybe one of the messages they were going for was you can find stories even in the mundane. Joe wanted an adventure, just like Tom and Huck wanted an adventure. All Tom and Huck had to do was swim across the river to a riverbank to find theirs. All Joe had to do was go out into the park to find his. So if you're going to look for adventure, you're going to look for a story, you can find it anywhere.
I think that's lovely, Erin. I kind of agree with that as a thought. When I was a kid, some of my favorite childhood memories involve me and my siblings or my cousins just hanging out in the woods in the middle of nowhere, making up stories and making up scenarios while we were out there with just our imagination. And that's really what these kids are doing too, growing up in the same time that I was. And it's cool to see what they did with their adventure time in a way that's very similar to what I remember and what I knew, despite never having come across a gravedigger, I'll say. But most of it I can really say was nostalgic and I remembered it fondly. So at the very least, even if I didn't learn anything, it was really enjoyable to watch them have a similar childhood to the one I experienced.
I think you bring up a really great point about them running around in the woods. And if you've seen the episode, you know that, they don't have cell phones. They don't have much technology. David has this giant boxy computer and arcade games. And that's it. And, today, you don't see that happening as much, and, people go away on vacations without their cell phones specifically for that reason. It's a big thing if you don't bring your tech with you. And I think it's really interesting to watch this now from a perspective where, for my job, I have to have my cell phone on me all the time, and it feels amazing when I don't need to use it or, turn off my computer. I'm like, oh, yes, bliss.
It's nice to be unplugged sometimes.
Exactly, and, I think it's great to watch this and be thinking about that.
One of the things that I really liked in this episode when they introduced us to the frame story and the ensemble cast is they introduced us to the 90s. As Rory sort of touched on, you have kids still going out into nature without cell phones, but you have David's ridiculous arcade machine and computer, and it is a part of this show, and I think it's part of the reason people find the 90s so interesting, that birth of new technology that is now so pervasive in our lives. You can watch it happen through this time period and through these episodes. So even in the first episode about children going out into nature to find adventure, you still have an arcade machine and a computer.
Speaking of that rad computer and in-bedroom arcade setup that David had going, I want to talk about some of the best 90s fixtures and moments and fashion that we got to see in this premiere two-part episode. I thought it would be a crime to not mention Wanda Gilmore's ridiculous outfits. She looks straight bonkers. Like, not even 90s weird outfits, because Ellen was rocking some prints that were a choice, you could say. But Wanda just looked crazy pants. And so did her pants. Literally, were crazy.
I identify strongly with her, which is
Is it because
probably
you
not
dress
good.
like Wanda?
Yeah. Occasionally.
That's you. Give it 25 years.
Erin just shakes her head.
I do really like these characters, though, that the main ensemble is made up of. You got Joe, your main boy, standard white boy. You gotta have one as a protagonist. That's how existence works in television. But he does have really cool friends, like Sam. She's really cool. Samantha. She is a girl, for anyone who hasn't seen the episode. She does all kinds of sports and other things and wears a jean baseball cap, which is a thing that I forgot existed and wish I had not remembered. But she's still really cool and very, very impressive and strong and smart. And then David, who's smart in a very different sense because he seems to be literally a genius who can build crazy technology just at will because he wants to. And he is a person of color, and I think it's nice to have any sort of diversity, especially because this was filmed in, as far as I can tell, not a very large city in Texas, and that doesn't often behoove diversity racially. And I think that it's really cool, especially because no shows almost ever, 90s now, anytime, have very much diversity. So it was cool to have a couple of different genders and races and personality types represented in these main characters. And of course, Wanda.
And family backgrounds.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because Ellen is a single mom. Mm-hmm. And I wish she was everyone's mom. I just liked them. They seemed friendly in a way that endeared everyone to me, even Crazy Pants Wanda and the grave robber.
I don't know if I was endeared to the grave robber. Maybe after hearing his story, but he still was kind of scary in the beginning and chasing off kids
With
and
a
sort of
shovel.
threatening a dog, and I don't like that behavior. All right, you're guarding your family heirlooms, but chill out a little bit here. They're kids and a dog.
Yeah, you don't need to kick a dog. He didn't, disclaimer, he did not kick a dog.
No.
He looked like he was gonna kick a dog.
Also, what gets me is, isn't Wanda getting flirty with him at the end of the episode? Like, what?
I wonder if
Am
that's
I
just...
misremembering that?
No, you weren't.
No?
I
Okay.
like to think that Wanda's a nymphomaniac. They just can't show that on a television program, so they just allude to it.
That would explain so much.
I broke an errand, so we're gonna move on. We're going to move on to our last segment, the dog factor, in which we talk about our favorite dog moments from this episode. I want to give a shout out to Soccer the dog, our main Wishbone dog actor. He was also played by several other different dogs who did specialty tricks, but the main one in all of the episodes, and even in the ones where there are multiple dogs, the predominant portrayer of the character of Wishbone is Soccer. For me, the dog bits that I really quite liked the most was the fence leap trick, which was impressive and fabulous, and a lot of his acrobatic work. I think it took me a little bit to get used to the terribly cheesy voiceover work that was done, but it grew on me, so I think by the next couple episodes I'll really start getting into it.
And you also get introduced to the puns.
I also like that Wishbone introduced himself at the beginning of the episode being like, yeah, I'm a talking dog. What about it? And then just moves on. It's an easy way to explain why it's an anthropomorphic dog. Just be like, yeah, bye.
The thing that impressed upon me the most as a child was the dog haberdashery. Wishbone's hats from episode 1 are on point. He has a floppy, adorable Tom Sawyer hat, and of course his costuming is also always great. The costuming in general on the show is really good, but I specifically love all of the dog hats and costuming, so I thought we got to get introduced to that in this episode in a very nice way.
Do you think that Wishbone has its own costumer, like a dog haberdashery? Or do you think it's like one costumer for the whole cast and everyone, including the dog? Dog-specific costumes? Yes, no?
I hope they answered that question, especially at the end of the episodes. They have little segments where they talk about special effects or other things that they did, hiring actors. So maybe they will go into that for, this is how we make the costumes for actors and our dogs.
For our tiny dog costumes with their tiny, tiny hats. I love the behind-the-scenes things, so I'm very much looking forward to those coming up in future episodes because all of that TV magic is right up my alley.
I have to say, I actually don't want to know because in my mind, there is a dog haberdasher who is paid to make dog hats that stay on Soccer's head, and that's that individual's job, and that was a huge part of the show. So maybe there is some awesome costume designer, costume team, but dog haberdashery, it should be a thing.
Yes, I was a particular fan of him running around the junkyard and snooping into barrels and looking in different directions as if he was actually thinking and talking to the other actors. That was really
Great
cute.
emoting for a terrier. I agree. So thank you very much to Soccer the dog, as well as supporting doggy actors Phoebe Bear, Shiner, and Slugger in several episodes in the future. That's our show. We hope you liked it. If you dig Wishbone and books, read and watch along with us. We'd love to discuss. Next week, we are starving for a little bit of Oliver Twist. Join us on another adventure then. My name is Claire McRae.
I'm Erin Venable.
I'm Rory Nachbar.
And this has been Wishbonafide. Wishbonafide is created and produced by Claire McRae on Twitter at Claire_McRae, Erin Venable at Erin C. Venable, and Rory Nachbar at Roarnox. That's ROARNOX. This podcast is edited by Claire McRae with our snazzy theme song composed by Sean Creedon. Anyone who wants to reach us can on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook at Wishbonafide and directly through wishbonafide@gmail.com or wishbonafide.com, where you can also find sweet extra content. You can keep up with us by subscribing or downloading our episodes wherever you get your podcasts. Not to mention, a few stars or a lovely review would mean the world to us. Thank you, listeners, and most of all, thank you to the creators of Wishbone for their gift to us all. Until next time, this has been Wishbonafide.